Let's talk some economic matters now.
Yes.
The Central Bank of Nigeria has wrapped up its 300th Monetary Policy Committee meeting where the benchmark interest rate stays unchanged. Correspondent Nkechi Nana takes a closer look at the decisions from the MPC and the rationale behind them.
The Central Bank of Nigeria's second Monetary Policy Committee meeting of 2025 lacked the drama of rate hikes passed, but delivered a message of patience and precision. After 6 consecutive hikes in 2024 and a policy pause in February 2025, CBN Governor Alaje announced the committee's decision to hold all policy parameters steady.
Retain the MPR at 27.50%. Retain the asymmetric corridor around the MPR at plus 500 to minus 100 basis points. Retain the cash reserve ratio of deposit money banks at 50% and merchant banks at 16%. Retain the liquidity ratio at 30%.
This comes after headline inflation declined to 23.71% in April 2025, compared with 24.23% in March. The CBN is banking on macroeconomic indicators that show, at least on the surface, that inflation is cooling off.
These include the progressive narrowing of the gap between the Nigeria Foreign Exchange Market (NIFEM) and Bureau de Change (BDC) windows, the positive balance of payments position, and easing price of PMS.
The MPC acknowledged the easing price of PMS and improvements in food inflation, but warned of persistent pressures from electricity tariffs and FX demand. On the external front, Nigeria's foreign reserves have increased, offering better import cover and stronger buffers.
Gross external reserves increased by 2.85% to $38.90 billion as at 16th of May 2025 from $37.82 billion at end of March 2025. This represents an import cover of 7.6 months for goods and services. The balance of payments recorded a surplus of $1.10 billion in the fourth quarter of 2024, compared with $4.21 billion in the preceding quarter, on account of moderation in current account surplus.
The MPC expressed satisfaction with the moderation in core inflation and ongoing efforts to boost local production. Still, it raised concerns about the recent drop in global oil prices and called on fiscal authorities to ramp up non-oil exports. The next Monetary Policy Committee meeting is scheduled for 21st and 22nd July of 2025, when the central bank will once again review domestic and global economic conditions. Until then, it says it will continue to keep a close eye on inflation and exchange rate trends in its push to sustain macroeconomic stability. Nkechi Nana, Arise News.
All right, for more on these figures from the Central Bank of Nigeria, let's cross live to Lagos, Nigeria's commercial hub, and speak to economist Paul Alaje. Paul Alaje, always a delight to have you on Newsnight. Well, the organized private sector was hoping that the MPC would actually ease, the rates or come up with rate cuts, best case scenario, or at least remain where it is now. That's what we have now. What does this really do for business, especially SMEs, you know, that have the bulk of, the economy in Nigeria?
Thank you so very much for having me. Clearly, with the decision that has been made by the Monetary Policy Committee to keep rate the same, looking at NPR at 27.5%, and liquidity ratio, it still remains at the same 30%, and CRR at 50%. Clearly, what the central bank is signaling is that the bank is after liquidity in the system. And how would you know that? When you look at what was also kept today is the asymmetric corridor of 500 for the upper limit and minus 100 for the lower limit, which means if bank were to get borrow from the Apex Bank, is going to be paying 500 basis points. But if the bank deposits with the central bank, then the bank will be getting an interest that is lower than what the NPR is saying, because asymmetric corridor is around the NPR. So what does that mean? It means that, yes, the cost of borrowing is still very high, because when you check what the rate is at 27.5%, that is what bank will work with. And if they are borrowing from central bank, of course, it will go higher, but at least 500 basis points. So doing business and borrowing will be high. Why? Central bank have mentioned that in previous MPC meeting to control inflation. Unfortunately, inflation has remained really high. It has remained double digits even after rebasing. It's been between 24 to 23%, which is still very, very high. So here is it. How will it affect businesses? When businesses don't have access to loans, to borrow money, to do businesses, of course, it's going to have implication on their capacity to expand too. It's also going to have implication on employment. If businesses don't invest, then what we do is that we have crowd out employment as we continue to raise rates. So those risks are still there. They are still very much with us. But the central bank have mentioned that implementing this policy have also brought its own gains, which includes what happened last month when the American president brought a trade tariff that is really high. While that affected a number of currencies to a deterioration, he maintained that Naira was not badly affected as the policy government made has started much earlier. But the question is, what is the impact in the life of small businesses, even large businesses? When rates are high, it becomes very difficult for people to borrow at a moderate rate, because bank is not a charity organization. They will shadow whatever NPR is to give loans out for people. But of course, there is a trade-off usually between what is happening to inflation and what is happening to employment. For us to combine both together and find some level of balance is a desirable position. But what we see is when inflation is going up and poverty is going up, then in economics, we call it a stage where you have stagflation. And but central bank is saying that we have to keep this rate and carefully watch what is happening in external environment and also at the domestic environment, because IMF has projected that growth for Nigeria will be slashed. And beyond this slash to 3%, they also was projecting for next year that it might even go to 2.7%, which means IMF is looking at Nigeria economy's growth rate to grow at a slower rate. But recall that as this is happening, much is projected in terms of inflation for Nigeria to be higher by IMF, which was referenced by the central bank governor today.
Yes, I mean, coincidentally, Dr. Alaje, China today lowered its own rates to boost consumption and, of course, to help borrowing. This may be a flawed comparison between China and Nigeria, but hey, what do I know? To my question, let's talk about data. The CBN and the Nigeria Bureau of Statistics seem to be pointing to easing inflation, however little. But you recall, as you have just said, that the NBS recently rebased inflation on a new methodology. Should we be worried about the integrity of the figures we are seeing? And do you have any faith personally in all of these figures that we are basing all these assumptions on?
Well, most important thing is data. Data is life. It's not just because data can also mean something else, but let's stay with the number. The Bureau of Statistics came up with the rebasing of the inflation number to say that perhaps we might be too hard on ourselves, or let's make an adjustment to reflect what we are currently, our consumption pattern. As a result of that, the number released dropped from 34% to 24%. And the Statistician General was very clear when he said that when you go to the market, don't expect that what we are doing here will reflect exactly by the prices in the market. That is not what that meant. We are simply adjusting the parameter. So this is what usually should have happened. The Bureau of Statistics should have now converted what we have last year to the new methodology. That is when you can have real comparison. Because the comparison you may have is that last year to this year, the number improved. It will be very wrong to be saying the number improved when you have really not converted last year's number to reflect the pattern of analysis for this year in inflation. So, but if that is not done, in econometrics, what we'll do at best is to post this year as outlier number. Why? Because we cannot compare a period of a certain methodology with this period of different methodology. I give you something, example with employment data. Employment data, I think as of last year or so, 2024, before that time, it was 33%. We adjusted methodology and suddenly dropped to about 4 or 5%. So do we say that the economy has so grown that brought us to 4 or 5%? The answer will be false. What we did was that we adjusted how we calculate who is employed. We, instead of using 20 hours a week, that was changed to 1 hour a week. So as a result, people that were 2 hours, 3 hours, they were previously classified as unemployed, they are now classified as employed. So when you look at inflation, the pattern has also changed. And when you look at what Bureau of Statistics assumed, the assumption that was put forward, some of them make sense. But the question is, if we say some of them make sense, where we are comparing, we have to be very careful. Inflation number first came, showed 24%, reduced to 23%, went again to 24%, reduced again to 23%. We can see that we are still working within the range of 23 to 24%. But even with this rebased inflation, IMF is still projecting that this inflation may even go further high in the subsequent period next year, that we might, later this year or next year, we might see high inflation. But here is where what really matters. Assumption of central bank. Central bank is not the data agency. They will work with whatever is presented by the Bureau of Statistics. And this is why we think that that number is important to look at it. For instance, the food inflation number released shows that in Benue, there is a high inflation. Perhaps food inflation surge in Benue. But remember that Benue is among the food basket of the Federation. Go to Niger State, you also see similar reports. But at the same time, when we say that inflation, food inflation surge in these regions, but we're at the same time saying that food inflation reduced, we need to balance it such that as people read this report, confidence and trust, they are the most important currency for data organization. And I hope that in the coming periods, attention will be paid carefully such that in balancing it, trust will be something that is natural and it will be given to the respective agency of a government, especially as it affects data. So, but you can see central bank have said that, well, based on what we have, inflation appears to improve. The question is it really improving?
That's the question. We've been wrapped up now. Paul, before we let you go, 16% rise in food imports while all of this is going on. And we've heard from the Central Bank of Nigeria that, you know, the food inflation in April has remained moderately okay. And the MPC is actually urging the Central Bank of Nigeria to sustain the implementation of ongoing reforms to further boost the economy. Are you seeing any signs that the reforms of this government so far are truly reflecting on not just inflation, headline inflation, but food inflation and other indices of the economy?
Well, we have a number of things to deal with when it comes to food inflation. You know that we have had some shortages. In fact, the interview you had before mine had also revealed that we might be having some food shortages now or maybe in the near future. But here is it. With food supply reducing, we felt we could augment with food imports. Food import has its own implication. Number one, it's going to put pressure on the FX that is relatively limited in supply. Number two, it may serve as discouragement to local farmers. Number three, if we say that we want to now produce in Nigeria, there are insecurity in key production zones. Number four, we are empowering farmers and those who are not in Nigeria that are producing for us. What should we therefore do? And I think solution is where is what the focus should be on. What we advocate is that Nigerians should come up with a national agricultural program that will not just end with planting, but in processing and export. It will be an end-to-end program. What does that mean? We understand that there is insecurity in some regions, but there are other regions that are relatively safe in Nigeria. What we could do is to start farm ups, and this is not new. We can even name the farm up after the president. The name is not what matters. What matters is that we should identify areas that are relatively secure and provide sufficient security for this region, not less than 500 hectares of land, that we will look at what the land is favorable to. If it is maize, if it is rice, if it is beans, if it is wheat, whatever it is that is favorable, naturally, we can now identify people, including core members that are serving. Naturally, they want to serve, but are the area secure? So we can establish new settlements, new towns, new places, and grow steadily our farm output instead of depending on import. I had said, if we must import at all, it must be a short-term strategy. It cannot go beyond a year, but as it appears, we might be extending beyond 1 year. Remember that the announcement for food import at the time was only for 6 months. Today, we're seeing it gradually progressing to 1 year, and it might go beyond that. The overall effect, if this extends beyond 2 to 3 years, is that it will lead to abandonment of local farmers in any country that is favorable to importation. I give you an example of India. India in early 90s was known as a ship-to-mouth nation. But what did they do? After a certain leader came, they made deliberate action as we are shipping, reduce what we are shipping, and continue to improve what we are producing and put industrial capacity in place. Today, India is among the largest exporter of food to the rest of the world. I believe that Nigeria can do the same. If you get our strategy correctly, if you get our policy correctly, we can impact the life of our people. And let me say this, that is the real way we can bring down inflation. It's going to come from output. It's not just going to come from monetary policy adjustment. Right. It will come from production. It will come from output. It will come from agro output. And most importantly, it will come from manufacturing. So get agro correctly. And most importantly, get your energy, electricity correctly. There will be a nation to envy around the world.
Interesting.
Say that again.
Dr. Paul Alaje, for a reason, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and breaking down the figures for us on Newsnight tonight on the MPC's decision for today. Dr. Paul Alaje is an economist.